Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 8th episode of Living with Hep B. I'm your host, Richard So, the Executive Director of SF Hep B Free, and I thank you so much for joining us today. Today, I'm really excited. I have a new guest. Her name is Wendy L. She's joining us, and we'll be talking about her experience with hepatitis B and how it's affected her life. Wendy, if you could introduce yourself a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this. My name is Wendy Lowe. I grew up in San Francisco. I'm actually originally born in China and immigrated and grew up here. Right now, I'm a mother of two kids working in the Silicon Valley, and I am someone who has been living with hepatitis B. And recently I became part of the Hepatitis B Foundation, Just Be Storyteller program. And what that allows me to do is really share my story, share that experience, and provide a voice to this disease.
Great. And actually, several of the other folks we've had on this program have also participated in the Hep B Foundation Just Be Storytelling. It's a great compendium to the work we do, and they're much shorter stories. So we really recommend you take a look. We'll have the link right here in this part of the video down below, and also in the YouTube description area. And I think we have that clip queued up here. So hopefully we can watch that all together. And so all of you on the other side can see what these storytelling little sections are about, and then we can discuss. Let me do that right here.
The dawning sun spreads a golden glow out and above the horizon. The lighting accents the surface of the waves, drawing attention to the water's ebb and flow. I look out. What is it like to live with hepatitis B? In college, I was getting ready to study abroad in China. When I went in to get a vaccine for Hep B, I tested positive for the virus. I graduated, but I did not study abroad. For a whole decade, I put Hep B out of sight and out of mind. I was a busy, career-driven supermom, juggling family, home, and work in a fast-paced, always-on industry. In my 30s, the stress became too much. What knocked on my door was the virus, and I was put on medication. I learned to live with the illness. I became a health seeker, studying nutrition and fitness, practicing yoga and meditation. I learned to earn a living, yet let go of a workaholic career. And I had to redefine what is happiness and success. To me, health is wealth. A few years ago, a loved one passed away from liver cancer, and I might have liver damage. That hit me hard. I'm already doing everything I can, but it's still not enough. Regrets for the past, worries and anxiety for the future. How can I be okay? No one would choose to have hepatitis B, but since I do, how can I respond most fully to what is here? What if I were to connect to the beauty of living and to appreciate what is here now? What if I were to experience the bloom of this moment and the next moment? It's not about the quantity of years, but really about the quality of living. I'm less afraid of dying and a lot more afraid of not having lived. Just be mindful.
Great. Well, I think you did, first of all, Wendy, I think you did an amazing job. What a great storyteller.
Yeah, thank you. It still touches a part of me when I'm like watching this. So yeah, there's a rawness to it. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing your story. I have so many questions on some of the things that you talked about in your story. I'm wondering if to let this kind of be free flowing, is there any part that you want to specifically discuss to start out with, or otherwise I can kind of lead the discussion, however you would like to tell your story.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of place and happy to share everywhere. I think maybe one message would be like why I chose to do this story. I think as I kind of further along in my progression in the illness here, like just realize that there's a lot of silence, like because for lots of reasons, people not knowing and or concerned about stigma and not speaking out or speaking up for it, and realizing that this silence is actually contributing as a barrier for people to get tested, get screened, get linkage to care, and doing something about it. And for me, it just felt like, wow, there is something I can do to make a difference. And so that was like a big part that I felt very strongly
Mhm.
to share. And even though I also feel into this sort of this reluctance, like wanting to stay private and all that, but it just felt very important to do it. And so, yeah, so this is all new for
Yeah,
me.
well,
Yeah,
thank you. We talk about this in many of the episodes. I think it takes a lot of courage and bravery and a sense of wanting to give back for folks who are personally affected by the disease, whether it be themselves or a sibling or part of their family, that to talk about it, because there's still a lot of stigma in the community. And even if it's not a sense of stigma from the potential kind of STI, sexually transmitted infection factor of hepatitis B, in a lot of Asian cultures, there is this sense of you just don't talk about disease,
yeah,
or you don't burden your family members about it. And so, unfortunately, when there's stuff that could be done, if it was just the virus getting caught earlier, or making sure that the next generations, the children of those people that might be infected, are also getting checked, that whole step gets skipped because of this idea that we don't talk about disease. Um,
yeah.
Coming kind of out of that, I'm wondering, when you found out that you had hepatitis B and it kind of derailed this possible trip, how did you go through that? Did you talk to family about it? How did that process go?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I was graduating college from Berkeley, and my plan was to study abroad in China and really start a career there.
Mm.
So, and then this was part of the routine, right? You're going to a country that has high risk of hepatitis B. So I was to get vaccinated and along with other stuff. And so it was a surprise to like, oh, wait a minute, you're positive. I got test positive. So it really threw me like, what is this? Um, and then afterwards, got referred to a specialist and found out like my numbers were pretty high, but I was not a candidate for treatment.
Mm.
This is like 28 years ago. And at the time, because of the way I got it is really through mother to child transmission perinatal. Uh, I'm one, it, whatever treatment that was available at the time, it doesn't really, not that effective.
Mm.
And so I went to a support group for hepatitis. It was more of a hepatitis C.
Mhm, mhm.
And that experience, here I am, a 20-year-old young, Chinese girl, young adult. And I went into a support group, a lot of people were in their 40s, 50s. I was mostly, Caucasian men. And they were on this treatment. They were talking about how they were fatigued, lots of symptoms, spitting up and all of that. I actually came out of that support group more afraid and frightened and disappointed, because it kind of like, oh, is this what I'm gonna have to deal with? So there was a lot of emotions, reactivity, and feeling fearful. That's I did, I did talk to my parents about it, and this is the surprising thing is that my mom kind of knew that, like she had it, and that others around her. So she grew up in China, during like the Cultural Revolution era and stuff. But regardless, during that time, it was just very prevalent in China. But people don't talk about it, to your point.
Mhm.
And it was kind of like if you had it, you don't share, disclose it. But even if you share it, like to her point, there's nothing you can do about it. And then there is definitely a lot of misconception about how it can be transmitted. And I think that is that myth or misconception that contributes to this secrecy. Yeah,
Yeah. So knowing that, so it sounds like your mom knew that she had it as well, but
yeah.
what I'm hearing is she never told you that
Nope, nope.
and did she know that she had given it to you?
I don't think she understood that's how it could be given.
Hmm.
I think there's still the myth that you can, potentially get it out of close contact, which is not true, right?
Hmm.
But there's that myth that you can. So when I did bring up, because it was an important decision, like, do I go to China or not? That which was the most important thing for me at that point. Like, what is this thing? It's getting in my way of
Right.
doing the things that I want to
Want to
do,
do.
right? But that decision, do I go to China or not, was like, a important decision that weighed on me. But I think for my parent, that's where they share, oh, well, this is just something you have. And
Hmm.
so it came to me as a big surprise. But we did get, like, my siblings tested for my parents and all of that. And, I think I kind of got the short stick as far as having, the developing to chronic infection and
Hmm.
having to live with it. Yeah.
So are you saying that your siblings don't have chronic Hep B?
Yeah, they don't have. Yeah,
Interesting.
which is fortunate. Yeah. So the good news out of that was with my incident, right, in college doing that test, it did kind of spawn this process for my siblings to get tested. Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. In most cases, the virus will pass on to all the children if the mom is not undergoing some sort of prophylaxis along with the infant, right, as they're born. But yeah, that is good news that they didn't get it. But I'm glad that this kind of, who knows, if you didn't get this test done to go to China, you may have been one of those people that we always talk about on this program that just doesn't know, doesn't feel sick, might have liver damage occurring through their life, only to get a serious liver disease or need a transplant in when you're 40s and 50s, which is closer to now. And
Yeah.
so that's good. And so I'm wondering, given the stigma that we talked about when you talked about this with your mom, was it a conversation that she was very uncomfortable with? How did it go?
I well, this is definitely more than about 30 years ago almost.
Hmm.
But I think at the time, it's motherly love, right? What child, like, uh, I think there's not wanting, obviously concern for me because my numbers were high. So at the time, the decision was like, oh, there's no Western treatment, but to go for Chinese herbal treatment.
Hmm.
That was, and then the question was, do I go to China? It was going to be in I think Nanjing, which is in northern China. I'm from southern China. Is there, medical care, reliable Chinese
Hmm.
medicine, or am I better off staying here in the US and finding, like, within the San Francisco Chinese community, finding traditional Chinese medicine?
Hmm.
So in the end, the decision was, I was advised, which I did follow, to not go onto this adventure that I wanted to do.
Hmm.
So, and things, your trajectory of life kind of changes with things, right? So I was going, taking herbal medicine and things like that. And I think this kind of touches on a part, right? For me, as someone growing up as a Chinese American, you're kind of like crossing this, like when you're sick, do you go to the traditional Chinese doctor, right? And listen, which is kind of what I grew up with, right?
Right.
Because we're a transplant here. Or do I kind of open up like to the Western medicine? And I think living with this illness or, sometimes a lot of that kind of come in and I'm like right in between. Like even now when I go see a Western doctor, like there's been times where I've seen lots of different doctors over the years because, changes and stuff. But if I share, oh, I'm taking some Chinese medicine, there's a bit of like, you really shouldn't do that, and they're not sure what to do with this. When I tell them I'm, seeing Western doctor, Chinese doctor, not quite sure what to do with that. So and then I feel as a patient, like not having the tools or knowledge, right? Like, what do I do? So yeah, so that's a piece of what I would kind of point to as, I don't know if it's necessarily emotional labor, but sort of like that mental straddling.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a great point. A lot of the physicians that we work with that do a lot of work with the Chinese immigrant or Asian immigrant community, it's something that they talk about too, because there's still this issue with often these, I don't know if you would call it like hardcore Western doctors that are automatically like, you shouldn't take any Eastern medicine. None of that is proven. There's not much research, or research has shown that it either does nothing or mostly does nothing. So you shouldn't do this, but it creates a divide. It creates less patient trust for patients who grew up in those communities. And then a lot of times there's those issues or those benefits from kind of placebo effect type things. And a lot of the Chinese physicians that we work with are always now looking for ways to where it can be complementary and kind of symbiotic, and say, this is, if it makes you feel better and your family is happier with you, or whatever the tradition may be the case, and it's not hurting you, there's no reason why we shouldn't be taking the best of both worlds, and interacting with those healthcare systems together. And so we now know, at least in some of these clinics that do work in those immigrant communities, a lot of times they're saying, let me communicate with your Eastern medicine doctor, and at least to make sure that if there are medications, that the herbal medicine and the Western medications don't have contraindications, so that it's like toxic if you combine something like that. And that's the least we can do, right? To make those cultures better meld and succeed, because ultimately it's just the health of the patient that is key here.
Yeah, and I would just echo that, and that in my experience, right, having moved to different primary care or specialists, I am looking for doctors that are more, rather than hard edge, right? It's like, oh, if you do this, no, because it's out of my scope of practice. But someone who's more like, oh, okay, I'm here to listen and hear, right? And then offer advice, but without that extra, like, you shouldn't do that. I think that's important in that medical, clinical, between the doctor and the patient. Because like, to your point, the trust, if I feel like this is something I have to hold back, right, that's just not setting up a good relationship to provide the best care possible. So yeah.
And then the other thing I wanted to touch on, which was a really good point too, is talking about the original support group. It's such a good thing to go out and look for support groups, but one of the things that's often missing, we hear from patients and physicians, is there's not that resource around hepatitis B and hepatitis B related care and education. Fortunately now, and we've talked about this in a couple episodes, there is a global forum at www.hepbcommunity.org, and we'll put that down in the description as well. And now that that forum has grown to include patients and physicians and public health advocates from around the world. It's just focused on Hep B, and people there are telling their story, asking questions. It's a great forum run by a doctor who's based out of Australia, but the patients are from all over the place. And so now we have at least have a virtual area to talk about that. And it is something that here in the Bay Area, we are trying to talk to more physicians about, really trying to be a resource to patients, so that there are things like the Just Be storytelling and like this series, Living with Hep B. Our goal here is so that folks who first understand their diagnosis or are concerned about the disease can see other people like themselves, hear from other people in a way that's not just a doctor or an ad for a Hep B medication, to feel more normalized, safe, healthy, and know that there is that you can live with this disease in a healthy, managed way. So I think that experience of yours, in which case you said that was almost negative because you just got scared and you
Yeah.
didn't see folks that looked like you, and you were worried about what the disease progression might look like. So that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
So. Mhm.
Yeah. I would add to this as far as, my experience and things. I'm glad that things have changed. A couple of things. One is, I mean, over the years, right, staying the Bay Area and all that, I have seen information or awareness on getting screened, like
Mm,
encouraging people to get tested. What I felt was there was an absence for someone like me who's already living with it. Now, what do you do? So I think that hepatitis B community.org, the site that you talk about, is a great resource, right, for people who can go online. And, I'm aware of it. You can go anonymous, and there's a reliable, I think that's the other piece, reliable resource that you can go
mhm,
to. And then some of wherever you are in this journey, right, if you are positive, whether it's just monitoring, whether it's managing it with treatment, or there might be different life stages, right, that
mhm,
come along. I think it is great to have this community where if you share something, I think the important thing is like to feeling like you're not alone.
mhm,
Um, I for the longest time, I've never spoke to anybody about this. It's just something I talk to my primary care about. And so it feels like a very isolated experience, even though I know there are other people that are probably dealing, but I don't know who, right? And you're not supposed to say. And so it was like the secret that you don't want people to know. And I'm really trying to, like as part of this doing this, is kind of step out of that and saying, poke a hole and pop that bubble there, and imagine when more people come out and speak and kind of normalize it. Um, uh, there's even though it doesn't cure, but I think there's a healing to people living with it, like emotionally, mentally, right? And for their
mhm.
better well-being. I think having connection supports that. So,
Yeah, I think studies and physicians and patients all say, when you don't feel alone, when you feel like there's a team of people facing it together, working together, you're just going to have a better result and feel more comfortable. And that brings me to your relationship, your partner, and for your children. Is it something how did you deal with the situation when you got into a relationship and were deciding on building a family?
yeah, well, I mean, I think when I was with my husband, it definitely, that's like one of those like dating conversations at some point where you feel safe enough, and then where I share like, hey, I have this thing, right? But leading up to it, there's always anxiety,
Hmm.
and also the lack of, again, coming back, the lack of speaking about it. And then here you're kind of talking about it in a relationship that you really care about, right? Where
Yeah.
like the stakes can feel high. So yeah, but with my, at the time, my boyfriend and then become husband, we spoke about it and make sure he get vaccinated. And so as we got uh serious into the relationship. And then for my kids, I mean, it's great. They're born millennial kids, 2000, but even I think somewhere around the 90s, right? In the United States, at least, there's been new birth children that are born, they automatically get vaccinated, and maybe you have more accurate facts for that. But for both of my kids during my pregnancy, it was very clear, right? Like, if I remember, I think we were even following more closely while I was pregnant, just to look at the viral load.
Yep.
And then we make sure that after kids were born, that they got their dosage and repeat to get vaccinated.
Yeah, that's more or less correct. Starting in the mid 90s, it became standard practice of care to test pregnant mothers for hepatitis B. And then, of course, hopefully when the pregnant mom gets pregnant at the very beginning, is they discover along the barrage of other tests they do to make sure that the mother is healthy and that the children will be healthy. There is that Hep B test, and then put the mother on medication to lower that viral load, make it less likely that she would transmit it to the child, and also give the children something which is called HBIG, and it's kind of like a booster prophylaxis to make sure that the virus isn't transmitted. And then, of course, at the appropriate age, vaccinate those children so that they're not going to have gotten the disease, even in its acute form. And as many folks know, now you have to prove your hepatitis B vaccination status to start school for kids, at least here in California. And so I mean, that is great. And it sounds like your boyfriend at the time and now husband was pretty, may I ask, was he nervous about it, a little bit afraid? Did you guys do research together?
Well, by the time I already knew a lot. I mean, I kind of like, this is pre-internet, and I did the research. So I think it was more of sharing the information with him. And I'm not I think the idea that there's vaccination, right, makes it definitely is
Much
like,
easier.
okay, we just need to stop, detour, do this first, and then resume, right? So I think that didn't make the conversation difficult or anything. And also, so he is of Chinese ethnic Vietnamese background, and so like this again, hepatitis B is not like an unknown thing. But again, it's one of those, like, it's there, but then we don't, like, the thing we don't
talk
talk.
about it, or
Yeah, it's
nobody
one of
knows
the
the
things
specifics.
there are a lot other things too. Yeah, but I mean, he and I we talked about it, and make sure that we did the safe protocols and things. And I would say, out of this incident, if I zoom out, and that's been maybe one of the messages I want to get to the viewers, is that while I got found out in college, it was like kind of like a really disappointing thing. And I kind of like, oh gosh, now what could have been, I couldn't do all these things. But these days, if I do retrospect, that in some way has been a gift, right? To your point, because I found out early, there was a period I didn't monitor. Well, there was monitoring, but nothing you can do and all that. But then I was able to get treatment in my mid-30s. Right now I'm 49. I am aware of other people around me who not, that in this 40s, 50s, like to your point, like, oh, all of a sudden they pass of liver cancer and from this. So in that regard, every step along the way of me knowing, of finding out accidentally, right? But finding out, it's been, there's other things too, like, because I found out, when I got a antiviral medication, I like, hey, this is serious. I really embark on this journey of being a health seeker, and, nutrition, fitness, yoga, meditation, like just that became a big part, health and well-being. And I think all of these are things that helps to change the trajectory of that health span. And so these are all things that I feel grateful for. And so like in that video, I was talking about, well, I don't choose to have this, but if I do have it, what is the best way to respond?
Yeah,
And that question
exactly.
is going to be different for everyone at different point in time. But by asking this question and kind of opening up to what at different life stages, right? So like, whether it's dating or having kids, and then later on, the disease, progress in different way. At each juncture, you can still ask this question, like, what's the best way to respond? And then more than more often than not, there's like a healthy, useful, there's a sense of agency. Like,
Mhm.
well, I can't get rid of it. There's no cure yet, but there's all of these other things I can potentially do. And so can I lean into that? So that's been sort of my, I don't know, uh, mode of direction,
Yeah,
or yeah,
mode of
North
thinking.
Star. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think for those of you who've watched several of the episodes, thank you if you have. But this is a great kind of segue into different spots of how people have dealt with it. If you watched our very first one with Alan, the newscaster, I think back in the 80s, he actually gave his then girlfriend, now wife, acute hepatitis B, and they had no idea about it. She displayed classic symptoms of an acute liver issue, turning yellow, and he had no idea, and he had, without knowledge, given her hepatitis B. And as those of you who have listened know, that when you get infected as an adult, the most likely version is acute. Your body naturally fights it off within a month's time, usually 2 weeks, and then you build natural immunity. But of course, nobody wants to get sick, and of course, Alan felt so guilty about giving his girlfriend at this time this potentially sexually transmitted disease. Of course, for him, he had gotten it from his mom. Again, we see this across all of our hepatitis speakers. They are always, or almost always, likely to have gotten it from their mom, with their mom not knowing or not realizing it could be passed that way. And then you jump to someone like one of our last David Urich interviewees, who found out kind of as a teenager and really didn't want to accept it, was really afraid of it, and felt if he just like set it aside and didn't worry about it, it might not affect him, and kind of almost in denial, but then it weighed on him. And in his story, he talks about one of the first potential romantic partners he had. He did the responsible thing and told the woman about it too, and it really kind of stopped the progress of the relationship. He was very young at the time, and we could see how anyone might be concerned about that. But it is one of those things that might affect that, and it's again about educating and finding a partner who is going to understand you and support you, especially, Wendy, as you said, if this is something like, well, the good thing is go get vaccinated and you won't have to worry about this disease for yourself. And of course, now the medical establishment has all the tools that they need and that the patient needs to make sure that that the cycle of infection stops and doesn't get passed on to the children or your children. So we've had now kind of interesting the different types of responses for hepatitis B in terms of relationships that we've seen in a bunch of our storytellers. So Wendy, thank you for your version of how that has happened, and then how it has affected your outlook on life and relationships. And then the other thing I wanted to note is I really wanted to highlight your part about how it's kind of fortunate that this kind of routine, but also not necessary test, if you weren't traveling to China, caught this disease. And that now, 20, 25 years later, you are hearing about people who are your age now who are passing away from liver cancer or liver disease caused by Hep B. It really makes me think like parallel universes, right? That could have been
yeah.
me if I didn't get this. And it makes me really want to do more of this work, because when I'm out there seeing that, you could have been that 1 in 4 that develops serious liver disease, and that all it takes is a by chance 1 5-minute test to change that and make sure that a person can stay healthy. So everybody who's listening out there, this Wendy story is perfect. She knows people right now her age that are passing away from this disease that would be exactly in her same spot. But fortunately, because she got tested, which you can do today, usually low cost, or free at your own doctor. A 5-minute call could save your life and make sure you're not getting this disease. Um, so I just wanted to highlight that little
Yeah,
thought
no,
too.
I that's so important, right? And then if you just what you just said is perfect. And then also if you just move that needle up even forward a little bit, right? It is because we've been so silent that we don't talk about it, that not enough people are aware of it to go and get tested.
Mm-hmm.
Just doing that to go and get that 5 minute. So if we can somehow normalize talking about it, bringing that awareness. I was just reflecting, and this is part of, part of my thing. I mean, with COVID, at least here in the United States, I know it's not the same everywhere, but people are, it's open. Like if someone says, "Oh, my child just got COVID," or like you hear, it's a normalized.
Mm-hmm.
It's normalized, and it's okay to share about it. And then people take the right necessary protocol, right, to isolate, to do whatever they need to do. And I was just reflecting what it might be, right? Like if for hepatitis B there was um, a normalizing. It's like, hey, I have this, I need to take care of it. These are the things that I'm doing. And if there wasn't that barrier, how much further we could be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because there is vaccine.
Right.
So yeah, so I'm just kind of really leaning into sort of the possibility of this. And so if I could add my voice to move that little needle, here I am. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's one of those, fighting the stigma is one of the main reasons we do this kind of YouTube podcast, in the hopes that other people will take a look, see people that look like them, and see that one, it's something that to be ashamed of. And the more that it's kind of one of those thresholds where, okay, talking about COVID, because so many people got infected, and then and community members started by saying, okay, I have this, I care about not infecting other people, so I'm going to say that I have this. And we just need to reach a similar point with Hep B, especially because we have the tools to stop it. I want to ask a couple of questions
yeah.
about what are the prime things that you would want to tell a person who is worried about, let's say they had just gotten their diagnosis and have all the worries that's related to that. What would you try to want to tell that person?
Yeah. Um, multiple things, I think. Oh, one is I want to say, if it's not your fault. I think it's really important. There's a bit of internalizing. There's like,
Mhm.
right, whatever, how things are. Um, and a second part is, as we kind of touched, you're not alone, right? And there are resources to support you, and then we've talked about it during this podcast. And I think there is a part of like just acknowledging that when you get a diagnosis, that, yeah, it's like a rock that hits on a still water, and it creates a splash. It's going to
Mhm.
create some splash. It's okay to kind of like, oh, this is what I'm feeling right now. This is feeling scared. I'm feeling, whatever the emotion, angry, frustrated, all of those are okay. And allow that to be, so that instead of like suppressing it, definitely like seeking somebody to talk to if you have, or that helps. And then the next thing is like, okay, like the question that I said, okay, now that given this is my situation, what is the best thing I can do? How can I respond? And just ask that question of yourself, and what, right? And you take one step at a time. And I think the thing is, nothing stands still. Right? Things are changing, your circumstances are going to change. Like before, I was always told, oh, you're going to be on this medication indefinitely. I'm like, indefinitely, which can feel very fixated. But like now, as I'm learning, right, there's a lot of research being done, and about clinical trials and functional cure and all of that. And so it's sort of like in my bubble, I thought things are always going to be this way, but when in fact that's just my perception. So I
Mhm.
think I'm kind of speaking a little more to that individual, kind of how do you work with your mental and emotion piece, I guess. but we all have our own tools. I think that's another question to ask, like, what's the best way for you to to respond? So for me, it was, I'm a very before people say type A, very driven, like, okay, like, what can I do? What can I do? Right? And I've learned there's a lot of things I can't control, but there's actually a lot of things I can influence. So that's why I felt like I got into learning nutrition, became like a certified health coach, started doing personal fitness training. All of these things was sort of a response to, like, how can I lead the most healthy lifestyle that I can. And I would say, as a byproduct, not just for myself benefiting, but for my family, they're benefiting from it. My daughter just got back from a camp and she's like, yeah, they didn't have much vegetables, mom. So when I heard that, I'm like, okay, this is, it's ingrained.
Yeah.
So these are some of the benefits. Like, again, I wouldn't choose to do this, but as a response, these are some of the byproduct benefits that I'm at least witnessing. So yeah,
Yeah.
so consider that for yourself. If you're, in that, what would be useful for you in this moment?
Yeah, for those listening who may be concerned, again, Wendy has just told you some great ways to help manage it and be mentally healthy. There's always help if you haven't talked to your doctor often can have resources wherever you are located. Again, that global forum is a good resource. You can call our organization, and we have several patients who participate in advocacy and things just like this, like Wendy. And in some cases, we connect people who are just concerned with folks who have the disease themselves. I think Wendy was able to connect with one of our previous speakers just to talk about, how getting more involved in advocacy and perhaps just living with the disease. And so we are happy to try to help. Resources are there, I guess is what I'm saying. We will do our best to make sure you can feel comfortable and safe and know that you have the tools to deal the best you can with this disease. And this really dovetails into my next question for you, Wendy, which is, I think a lot of people are worried about how having this disease will affect their life and the long-term effect of their life. And so I'd love if you could talk a little bit about that and how it affected your life earlier. Especially, you talked a little bit how originally there wasn't there much you could do, but now there's some medication, and I'm wondering how it might affect your daily life. Do you still think about it normally as you go about your daily routine?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start in the beginning and then take it to where I'm at now. Yeah, so back in the 90s when I got diagnosed, the treatment was, I think, interferon. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, but because I've had this as a young at birth, I wouldn't respond well for the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Besides, the side effects were,
Terrible.
yeah, it's like, wait, I
Terrible.
don't
Yeah.
have a problem, and this is gonna make me not able to do my things. So that felt, I have to say, that kind of felt, disempowering, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the time. But the instructions for me was to keep monitoring. And I think this is a point to highlight, maybe, right? I was, I guess, continue to just keep monitoring. And I think that's the piece where things can get lost. And for me, it did get lost because as I changed from one healthcare provider to another, I have to really explicitly like ask and prompt them to do the labs and to, and somewhere along the way, we weren't, neither my doctor nor I was monitoring it. That's why I alluded to out of sight, out of mind. And in that
Mm-hmm.
time, I think for me, there was a bit of like turning away from it. Like, there's nothing I can do anyway. Why bring it into my consciousness and have
Right.
something to worry about, right? The path of least resistance was to push it aside. And I was fortunate as I changed one to a different doctor, she looked at my record. She's like, when was the last time you got tested for, a liver function test? I think we should order one. And so she did. And that was like, oh, the numbers were quite high. And she's like, okay, we're going to send you to a specialist. And that's when then they put me on antiviral medication.
Mm-hmm.
And and that was like news to me that, oh, actually there is
Something you can
medication
do
now.
now.
And I remember talking to the doctor, this is back in 2011. He said, yeah, these medication, they're good like over 4 to 5 years. And then if you develop resistant, then we have to try a new medication. And at the time I said, are you going to run out? Like
Yeah.
every 5 years I have to switch. And he kind of said, well, they're coming up with new ones all the time, so don't worry. So that was helpful because there was medication. And so ever since then, for more than a decade, I've been on this antiviral medication. I've pretty much stay on it. And the routine is really taking 1 pill a day, every day. So I have to, I'll just touch on this, right? As far as like, in the beginning, I felt like, oh, this pill was like a daily reminder of me having this.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like landed with a negative feeling about it, like bummer, like why is this? But more recently, again, this is this reorientation, right? Reframing it and saying, well, now I feel grateful. Like if I take that pill and I kind of practice gratitude and like, thank God that, I'm thankful that there is treatment available that, is quite effective. And also the other piece to speak about is that I happen to be, in my life situation where I have access to this treatment,
Right.
right? Because I think, globally, different people in different circumstances, even if they know that the medication might not be within reach, whether because it's affordability, is there are other barriers. So when I kind of reflect on that, and then I feel lucky. So again, it's that reframe, to practice gratitude for what I have. And so that's one of the things I do. Like when I take the pill, it's like there's a moment of like, okay, I appreciate.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, have I
That is, yeah, that's
reflecting
a
if I answer your question fully
no,
here?
that's perfect. And I think that's a great way
Yeah.
to look at it. And again, different ways to handle it. Alan, when we asked him this question, he said, I don't even really think about it. He's getting older too. He's like, how some folks take aspirin a day or some sort of cholesterol med. He's like, I just throw that in. I think of it as a vitamin. And he's like, when I started doing this, I think about just that. I'm glad, just as you said, that he has something that can make it so this disease pretty much is out of mind for himself. And his version of his comfort in it is, he says, normalize it. He says, think about it like just another thing you're doing, and then it won't affect your life very much. So whether you take this kind of mindful, positive thinking version that you have, or his version of kind of positive, the point is, it's not something you should think of so negatively. It is something, just as folks take medication for high blood pressure or obesity or diabetes, something that a lot of people have, it shouldn't necessarily be weighing on you that much. And whatever method works best for you, works for you. Um,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, just going back to the very beginning of your Just Be storytelling, how did you find out about the series, and what spawned you to go, you know what, I'm gonna be out
Mm.
there as as an advocate, or starting my advocate journey?
Yeah. Well, you know how again, certain things can be like out of a bad situation or whatever circumstance, something beautiful can come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think during the pandemic, if I remember, like June 2020, I've never heard of the Hepatitis B Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a 30-year organization. I've been diagnosed for 28 years, but I was unaware of it. I was aware of like the American Liver Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
Hep C, but like, and I was always like, why isn't there one for Hep B? We're like invisible, unknown,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I saw an event where I think they did this external led draw pharmaceutical, like asking anyone who's interested, caregiver or patients, to attend this global remote event.
Mm.
And because it was COVID, everybody's working from home, I was available. So I joined and I listened, and they were gathering information. And I was just like posting my views when they asked questions. And one of the comments I said, this is the first time in 26 years that somebody's asking me what it's like to live with it, because nobody asked.
Mm-hmm.
You just supposed to, have this in the closet. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so it felt very it kind of opened me up. And then Dr. Cohen, who's the senior vice president there, somehow reached out to me. It's a side story, but and we talked, and she said, oh, at some point, we're doing this Just Be Storyteller. If you're interested, maybe you should, we would love for you to contribute. And I think because of COVID, they didn't conduct a workshop. It was an in-person workshop. So I
Mm-hmm.
kind of had time to really kind of mull over, because again, I said I'm a pretty private person.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea of coming forward, speaking up, kind of making public, that's still something, as I said, I'm trying to get used to. But
Mm-hmm.
what really comes back to me is sort of if not me, am I waiting for someone else
Right.
to do this? And the more I reflect on it, I'm actually in this unique position, having had this long arc and journey with living with it, right? And then also I think personally as a journey is how it has affected me, that there's some things that I've leaned into, right? Like you said, kind of this mindful, this positive, and really making the best of the circumstance and living
Mm-hmm.
fully. And I feel like that might be a good message, that if we share, however people choose to respond, accept, and listen to it, just feeling like if that's a way to make a difference. And as you and I talked, right, you could be talking about this and giving the stats and the numbers, and then if somehow my story or somehow a little bit of what I'm sharing really touches someone, and for them to take action, to whether to talk to a friend, talk to someone they know, or just go check out some of the resources, right, and
Mm-hmm.
get screened, or someone I would say who is positive, who's not been monitoring.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of that huge gap there, because they're not the candidate for treatment yet.
Yeah.
So the monitoring is sort of why am I doing this? So maybe that's a trick, a motivation to get back. Or someone had treatment and then dropped off, right? Because I think there's another piece about the treatment in the US, at least, working with insurance and coverage. And
Yeah.
during COVID, I was concerned that I might not have continuous access to the medication, right? So I think there are, because it's kind of, if you are positive and you have the chronic, you pretty much have to manage it throughout your life. There are different stuff that happen as part of living, right? That might come in the way. So the question is how you get back, you know and get back on this path of linkage to care. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are listening, so many of the things Wendy talked about are absolutely true. If you do need resources if you don't have a doctor or are uninsured, SF Hep B Free, along with many clinics, are able to help. You can contact us on our website or at our helpline. And we work with a lot of services that enroll folks in Medicaid and Medicare. There are some clinics that are low cost or sliding scale to have access to both a doctor and the medication. Many of the pharmaceuticals have special programs to reduce the pricing of the medication. And that's all just communicating with us, and we will do the best we can to help you find and be linked to the care you need, whether that's just testing, whether that's vaccination, whether that's actually seeing a doctor or access to the medication. There are allies out there to help you find some solutions for yourself. Um, so thank you for that, Wendy. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you wanted to say to anybody listening to this right now?
Mm, yeah, I think the if number one thing is like not to be fearful. Well, it's not to say not to be fearful, that if you are fearful or feeling some of those things, acknowledge that, okay, right? If you are diagnosed or, something, that it's okay to feel this way, right?
Mhm.
And then at some point, you know, I, if there's a way, encourage yourself to move in moving out of that is to seek the resources and the care that is needed and appropriate for you at that point. I and then and I'm hoping, right, which is like, as I'm trying to modeling, and like it's okay to talk about it. It's okay. Like for me, having done the storyteller project, I mean, I've gotten a lot more conversation with my parents about it, and with my kids, with within the family. So um sometimes part of that concern or reluctance, I'm not sure where I got it, but it's like it feels bigger than it is. It's actually like a bubble, like a kid blowing a bubble. It's actually not that big of a deal, is what it is. And so if there's anything I can do to share, is, yeah, how might we move from being fearful to less fear? How do we move from feeling helpless to doing things that are helpful? I think
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
I think that reminds me your statement of one more thing, which I'm just curious about your input on, which is, given that you've experienced that there are folks just like you at this age who are ending up getting liver cancer, for kind of the Chinese immigrant community, both men and women who are now at about your age, and say we were trying to put together a project to educate and get folks who are like you, similar to you, to get tested and manage their status. What do you think? I'm curious what you think would work for that. How would we actively get those folks to understand, be educated, and take action?
Mm, yeah, um, it might be a multifaceted. Um, Definitely what you and we talked about, like, reaching the people with the language and the culture in the same way,
Mhm.
right? Um, I think e- another piece, there's a bit of maybe, like it's not too late,
Mhm.
like, not too late for yourself and for the people around you, because I think one there's a piece, right? This is not, in some ways, it's not just about me and my diagnosis. Part of the reason from, as a knowing, is so that we can help, especially for, the family, people that might also have gotten, through the mother child transmission. So of encouraging people that it's not just about the individual, but that it could have a very positive impact for the rest of the family if they know and get screened, right? Um, I think there's probably other things too, like definitely, hopefully, like things that if I share and that is relatable. Um, there is a piece of me as we're sharing this that maybe holding me back a little bit, is there's sort of the more Western, American grown sort of a, like maybe Alan and I are like of that generation, right? And open to, like, if we have to talk about your partner and, some of
Mhm.
these private questions, and talk about it. And then there's the more, like, if it's immigrating, growing up in China or some other country, and then coming here, that some of those traditional values might still be very strong and very prevalent, and there might be a different approach. So I think
Mhm.
that's why I feel like there's uh, there may be a tailored approach for a different segment. But so, like, I can give an example, for my parents who are there in their 70s, uh, because of me doing this project, we've really been very open about death and dying.
Mm.
And that is actually like also a gift in some ways for us to have this conversation. And, as my mom said, yeah, so and so I heard, passed from liver cancer, right? And as I said, someone who's my age, it's like it allows us to have this open discussion um, about things. It's not easy, but it opened up. And there is what I talk about kind of from the older generation where it's been like, oh, you don't really talk about. So different things can open up as a as a result of doing these things.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that's great, a great input on how we do that. And in fact, well, one of our next planned ones will hopefully be in Cantonese or Mandarin. Maybe I'll chat you up to see if you'd like to help, but I just need to get a interviewer in Cantonese. But we really understand, and when we do in community education, we always bring Cantonese or Mandarin speakers, really to make sure we're reaching both the English speaking and those ethnic speaking audiences, who are often some of the people who are most likely probably the more vulnerable and in need for these services. So thank you for that viewpoint too. I think that's it for this episode. I want to remind everyone that you can reach us at sfhepbfree.org. And if you have any immediate questions, please feel free to call our navigation line and leave a message. The message can be left in Cantonese, Mandarin, or English, and we will respond as quickly as we can. And that is if you have any regular questions, if you want to seek care, if you want to learn more, we're happy to do that. You can also email us on our website or follow us on Facebook. Wendy, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I love speaking to folks. It helps us do our work and better reach out into the community. So I'm hoping we can work together more in the future as you begin and expand your advocacy journey, if that's something you continue to want to do. And with that, we'll say goodbye to everyone on this session. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.